आजच्या कार्यक्रमासाठी सर्वांचे हार्दिक स्वागत. व्हर्च्युअल लेक्चर सिरीजच्या कार्यक्रमाचे आजचे प्रमुख व्याख्याते श्री अभिजित रोही सर, असिस्टंट प्रोफेसर, महाराष्ट्र नॅशनल लॉ युनिव्हर्सिटी मुंबई यांचं नवजीवन लॉ कॉलेजच्या वतीने सहर्ष स्वागत करते. आमच्या कॉलेजची LLB सेकंड इयरची विद्यार्थिनी दीप्ती शिंदे हिला मी विनंती करते की माता सरस्वतीचे स्तवन करावे. दीप्ती शिंदे, ओव्हर टू यू.
या कुंदेन्दुशार या शुभ्रवस्त्रामृता या वीणावरदण्डमण्डितकरा या श्वेतपद्मासना या ब्रह्माच्युत शंकर प्रभुतिर्भिः देवैः सदा वन्दिता सा मां पातु सरस्वती भगवती निःशेषजाड्यापहा शुक्लां ब्रह्म विचार सार परमा आद्यां जगद्व्यापिनीं वीणाधारिणीम् अभयदां जाड्यानकन्धारपहाम्. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dipti, so much. Yes, I welcome you all for phase 5 and day 13. As we all have seen, for the phase 5, for day first in phase 5, we have seen rights of transgender, human rights of transgender, wherein Miss Vanessa from Singapore was there to share her life journey. Yesterday, we have seen triple talaq and the Muslim women's struggle for the battle against the illegal practices. And today, we have, actually as per the schedule, we had Dr. Anil Varyat sir, but due to his ill health, it was now, we can say that our pleasure to hear Abhijit Rohi sir by that way. And I thank you, Abhijit Rohi sir, for the last moment invitation. And yes, sir. So now, I'd like to say that today's topic is regarding human rights of vulnerable section of the society. So now, I request our convener, Dr. Kundendu Kumar Dev sir, for his welcome address. Over to you, Dev sir.
Thank you, Saista. So, today is the 13th day of the virtual lecture, and it is on the 5th phase. As for the disability and absence of this resource persons who has accepted because of certain unavoidable circumstances, we are grateful that a substitute has been arranged and he is going to deliver the lecture on the human rights of vulnerable section of the society. So Saista has given a name and the introduction. I couldn't get the audio properly. So I welcome you, sir. I could see you in the picture. So from my bottom of our heart, I will welcome you, sir. And thank you very much. At the 12th hour, you have accepted our invitation and taken the burden to give lecturer on this occasion. I also welcome all the participants and the students who are regularly following this virtual lecturer. And I hope they have gained much knowledge with reference to the subject matter of the law. And today's topic is with regarding the vulnerable group on the human rights. You must be knowing the vulnerable groups when it comes to the question. It is the children, the women, the old citizens, the indigenous peoples, the minorities. There are several vulnerable groups. So I think sir will be touching some 2 or 3 parts out of this, and you will have the knowledge of the vulnerable groups and their human rights. Last but not least, it is a privilege on my part that we are conducting this lecture since last year. Why I say last year? Because we have started in the December. So it is last year, and this is the 2020. We have started in 2020, and this is 2021. So you can say it is a grant of 1 year also, but it's only a matter of 1 month. And I'm very uh, happy that it has been conducting in a very peaceful and smooth manner. With these few greeting words, I hand over the audio to Saista. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Human rights are the rights that all people have by virtue of being human beings. So, this is very essential that I always say that we need to develop the ethics that at least we should save humanity. Now, I request our senior faculty, Shri Makaranda Pandey sir, who is the co-coordinator of this virtual lecture series, to introduce the guest for today's lecture. Over to you, Pandey sir.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. A very good morning to all of you. Friends, as our principal, Dr. Dev sir, has rightly stated that the vulnerable groups like children, women, elderly people, economically and socially disadvantaged peoples, and the victims of ethnic or other violence, disabled persons, these are some of the categories which we can say to be a vulnerable group of the society. Now, they are having human rights, but they are violated very frequently by the dominant class of the society. The number of UN conventions are conducted to protect their fundamental rights, the human rights, and even our constitution also have the topics, the rights regarding the fundamental nature, which are fundamental in nature. So on this important aspect, to discuss the various provisions of national as well as international provisions, we have with us Mr. Abhijit Rohi. He will speak on human rights of vulnerable sections of the society. At present, he is working as assistant professor, Maharashtra National Law University, Mumbai 2016. After completing his BA and LLB, he has done his master's degree LLM from West Bengal National University of Judicial Services, NUIS, Kolkata, where he was awarded Saroja Gopal Krishnan Merit-Based Scholarship. At present at MNLU, he is a coordinator of IQAC, CEL, member of Center of PG Legal Studies, faculty in charge for ADR, and also a member of Library and Academic Committee. He was editor for MNLU Mumbai's Law Review, a research magazine published by MNLU. He taught various subjects including human rights, family law, media law, jurisprudence, IPR, research methodology to UG and PG courses. He delivered various guest lectures at IIT Bombay, Symbiosis Law School, and other reputed law schools in Maharashtra as well as in other states also. He worked as a faculty member in School of Law, Christ University, Bangalore from 2013 to 2015. He presented various research papers at national and international conferences, and he also published his papers in national and international journals also. He co-authored some of the books on human rights and gender equality. At present, he is pursuing his doctoral research, that is PhD, from National Law University, Bangalore, in the area of digital privacy and law. So friends, I once again welcome Mr. Abhijit Rohi and request him to address our participant with his knowledge and experience. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. With the introduction that I have gotten, it seems to be a very amazing initiative. I must congratulate the Law College and the authorities involved for taking this initiative. I'm pretty sure we are reaching the length and breadth of the country and then engaging people with intellectual discussions in these sessions. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. As you already know, like I have been substituted at the last moment because our registrar sir is not keeping well. So I pray for his good health and we can start discussion. It would be good if you would put your questions in the chat box, and towards the end of the class, probably that I would address all of these questions. And I encourage all of you to exercise your freedom of speech expression in this session, because we're talking about human rights. Let's give you the forum also to exercise some of those, and then you could mention your questions in the chat box. Now, the topic that has been given to me is human rights of vulnerable sections and the protection of those rights. The question that I put myself, and that's going to be my project through this engagement with you all, is to probably give you some ideas, not about the descriptive aspects of human rights and of the vulnerable sections, but make you a little bit uncomfortable by putting forth or giving you some discomforting experiences and examples, and then probably we would engage into certain concepts which are there behind evolution of the jurisprudence behind human rights of vulnerable sections. Now, before I go ahead and do that, I would definitely want to put forth as a disclaimer, and this is what I do in all my human rights law classes, because many people might feel uncomfortable based on the discussion that is happening in the class. My views may not necessarily be your views, and you may not necessarily be agreeing with my views. I respect all of your views, and that's the same thing that I expect from you to respect my views too. I shall give you the reasons for whatever the views that I am quoting. At the same time, all the discussions that we have right now are for the purposes of academic engagements and better understanding of the realities around us. And so I may be critical of the government, I may be critical of certain policies, legislations, the functioning of the parliament. Otherwise, multiple issues which would be there in the discussion that would flow about. But please keep it in mind that I am doing all of this not to disrespect anybody's feelings, but predominantly to engage in intellectually and academically with the concepts and the problems at hand. Having said this, I should now welcome you virtually to MNLU Classroom. I'm trying to lecture on the smart board, so that's the reason why I can stand and speak. So virtual welcome to MNLU Mumbai's Classroom. Now let's move on to the topic, and that's where I would be talking about two important conceptions under human rights deliberation. Number one, the concept of vulnerability, and number two is the concept of intersectionality. And both of these concepts have predominantly been existing in the domain of sociology and political science, but they have been brought into to understand law and human rights of some people. In fact, of all the people. And then when we are going to be talking about these two concepts, which will be the central project of my lecture in the class today, I would then substantiate all of my arguments with supporting examples, which would make these concepts more relatable to all of you in the audience. So now when we are going to be talking about the issues of human rights of vulnerable sections, the first question that probably I must address is, who are these vulnerable sections and what makes them vulnerable? How do we identify who are the vulnerable sections, and how do we identify whether people in vulnerable sections have certain additional requirements than that of those who will not be classified as vulnerable? And it's for this reason that I must make reference to the concepts which are present in sociology, and I am talking in terms of the vast literature available on the concept of vulnerability itself, of which I would be focusing on one tiny aspect, and that is social vulnerability. Because vulnerabilities can be of multiple forms. So you may have economic, social, cultural, political, and environmental for that matter. But I would be focusing on some of these vulnerabilities. And when I say the word vulnerability, what do I basically mean? And probably this is something which I would want to stress again and again, because this would largely help us understand how do we identify who are the vulnerable sections in the society. So when we say that there is vulnerability present with me or somebody else, we basically simply mean one thing, and that is my or somebody else's inability to the adverse realities or adverse impacts of different stressors in the society. So when we lead our lives, and this is probably all of us know, because life isn't as easy as we want it to be, and then we are already working towards having a better life, and that's why the domain of human rights anyway. The important aspect is that we are all vulnerable, one way or the other. Vulnerability would simply mean our inability to stand up to the negative impacts of different stressors. Stressors are those factors which kind of exert a negative influence on us. They create stress in our life. And those stressors can be multiple. Classic example of it could just simply be caste system, which is in India. Now, caste system in India is a stressor. Why is it a stressor, or why does it create stress? Is because the people who are the so-called upper castes and the people who are the so-called lower castes usually receive differential treatments. Precisely for this reason, why we have the Constitution of India, wherein we have guaranteed right to equality, we have tried to say clearly that we do not want any discrimination on the basis of caste, but nonetheless, Constitution making this claim, the reason behind that is the social reality. The reality that this discrepancy between the privileges that are being enjoyed by the haves, the upper castes, and the have-nots, the so-called lower castes, are actually evident. And while that is the case, we wanted to remedy that situation by having the provision in the Constitution. Now, when we are looking at this, caste then just becomes one example of those things which bring in certain degree of vulnerability. There are multiple of those. Those may be in the form of some of the social institutions. Those may be in the form of certain cultural or social obligations. Those may also be sometimes in the forms of laws that we have created, which basically carry the bias which the society also has. Each of these statements that I just made will be substantiated further by giving relevant, relatable examples. But important point to remember by this point is the simple fact that when we talk about vulnerability, we talk about inability of those sections of the population to withstand the negative impacts of certain stressors in the society. Now, once we have understood that that becomes a vulnerability, the scope of who becomes vulnerable broadens. So our traditional understanding of vulnerable population as just women, children, is not just that. Rather, it goes much more beyond just these categories. And there are certain parameters on the basis of which that these factors actually come in play. Now, one more thing that I should stress at this point in here is that if you look at Article 15 of Constitution of India, which says that there shall not be discrimination on certain specific grounds, right, like caste, place of birth, sex, and the religion of a person and everything of that sort. Most of those things which are seen in Article 15 are the ones which you and I have never really actually chosen for ourselves. Meaning thereby, before you took birth, you were never really asked by anyone whether you wanted to be born as a man, woman, or a transgender, whether you wanted to be born as an upper caste or a lower caste, whether you wanted to be born in the state of UP or in the state of Kerala, whether you wanted to be born in a very rich family or in a poor family. Nobody basically asked us. We just happened to be there in these circumstances. Now see the interesting link between these naturally existing circumstances over which you and I do not exert any pressure or any control are the ones which become the basis for most of the people why they feel stress in their life. Classic example, probably again relatable to most of you, is like if a person is supposed to go out and get married, and here I'm talking about an arranged marriage system, wherein let's say I have to go and search a partner. Usually, what are the criteria that we look forward to while getting married in the partner? And then you would probably see we do not look at largely as much about the education, qualification, everything of that sort, the intelligence of a person, the emotional quotient of a person, those are not our considerations. Our major considerations end up being the consideration as to what is the skin tone of a person, whether you are fair or you are dark skin. What is your height, whether you are tall or you are short. What is your financial background, or the job or this thing. So your physical ability or versus your disability. And all of those are major considerations. I'm not disregarding those to be saying that, okay, those are not relevant. But the point is, again, my skin tone, whether I should be fair or darker skin, is not something which I have chosen. But nonetheless, societal, construction is in such a way that people with fair skin are usually the ones who end up being preferred over people with darker skin tones. Now, do we then mean that this kind of a cultural setting or social accepted practices where fair skinned people are preferred over darker skinned people would create vulnerabilities in favor of the people who are of darker skin, or bias in favor of tall people versus the short-heighted people, and then vulnerabilities for these? And then you may be surprised to see that the documentary evidence on the basis of empirical studies has confirmed that this is actually the case. We do give preference to people who are either tall or have a better personality or are physically able, as opposed to that of people who are disabled, shorter in height, and darker on skin tone. Now, interestingly, if you would have been relating to whatever has just transpired a few months before in the 2020 in United States, the entire Black Lives Matter movement came about because of the use of the word white and fair, indicating a degree of privilege associated with white-skinned people. Of course, the matter there is different because it's largely about race. But even in Indian context, though it is not about race, but it is very subtly there. And that's probably the reason why you would see many of the international companies have went ahead and changed their names, their taglines, or their trademarks, because they did not want to use some of the words in the product. They did not want to use the words like fair, because fair means lighter skin tone. And why do we have to basically say that a lighter skin tone is better than a darker skin tone? Again, nobody chose to be born as a person either as lighter skin tone or as darker skin tone. But then you kind of see, if I am a person who is born with a darker skin tone, there are multiple challenges that I will face in my life. And those challenges would be finding it difficult to get a job, finding it, because I would be treated as secondary person, finding it difficult to get a partner, which is probably, I feel, compatible on other classical or conventional grounds, finding it difficult and then constant taunting by the peers and everybody. And that's precisely the reason why you kind of see these vulnerabilities make it difficult for people to probably adjust with what their selves are. The point to remember again, difficulty in adjusting with who they are and accepting oneself as what they are is a very important facet. For every vulnerable section, what is the problem is because there is a majoritarian notion which dictates that this is the ideal kind of structure or behavior, and if you fall out of it, you end up becoming the person who falls in the minorities. And the moment you are the minority, you kind of have to prove your worth constantly against the benchmarks which are set by the majority. And that's the constant struggle, right? I mean, imagine you as a person who is coming from a background which is financially not so well off, right? And then you see whether you have access to the premier institutions in this country. Because the fees of these premier institutions are usually very high. Let's say, I'm just giving an example. Zindal Global Law School is one of the very premier law schools in the country now, and a private law university, where you kind of see that the fee structure is exorbitantly high. If you are a person who belongs to a poor fraction of the society, you probably would not be able to afford a very highly expensive education. Now you see what happens subsequently. If you are poor, means that you will not be able to get good education, means that you will not have a better exposure as compared to others who would have better access to resources, means that you would have lesser opportunities to employment, means also that the exposure that you would get, the number of opportunities, the options that you would have would also be subsequently lesser. So what happens in the entire process, two persons may have the same level of intelligence, but the availability of the resources with one and the non-availability of the resources with another actually makes the race unfair for both of these people. And that's the issue that probably we have to highlight when we talk about the issues of vulnerability. Now, I hope you are able to relate to these examples. And most of these things I am not saying because they are my experiences. I am saying because, of course, we all have witnessed them in our lives, but they are documented, academically researched outcomes of the studies. So if you can challenge me as my opinions, you can look back to those studies and probably then figure things out. So that's one part, vulnerability. Now, if I ask you on what basis would there be multiple vulnerabilities present and what would be the parameters for these vulnerabilities, there would be a long list of parameters. As of now, what I have just said are your economic inability, so you being in poverty, or in another situations, you being darker skin toned person in India. Now, that's going to be one aspect. Another important facet of it all is that when we talk about vulnerability, this vulnerability can't just be of only one nature. In fact, there can be layers of vulnerabilities, right? And these layers of vulnerabilities is what we call. And by the way, this concept has come very recently, like 1989, around that time. And it's been 30 years in 2019. We kind of like celebrated 30 years of this concept of intersectionality. This concept of intersectionality will give you amazing few points to look at certain things. Now, the person that you and I must read is the works by Kimberly Williams Crenshaw. Now, she's a woman who is a lawyer and an academician. She teaches at University of California, Los Angeles, and she has been the proponent of intersectionality, which basically, if you are understanding it from jurisprudential lenses, or if you are the student of jurisprudence, you will see that this intersectionality emerges as the fourth wave in feminist jurisprudence, right? So, if you are looking at different identities that people have, people's identities make them vulnerable differently, right? So again, I will repeat this statement so that we are all on the same page and probably are understanding the depth of the sentence. Different people have different identities. With each identity, there comes a different level of entitlement or disentitlement. And when you have multiple of these identities, and each identity gives you some entitlements and some disentitlements, then each one of us in that sense is absolutely uniquely placed. And because we are uniquely placed, the discrimination or the opportunities that we would get in our lives are always going to be different. Now, why am I discussing this concept while I'm talking about vulnerable sections? Is because vulnerable sections are those sections which have certain identities which basically result in them having certain disentitlements in their favor, right? That means they are not privileged. That means they are, in any other circumstances, vulnerable. And that's the link between why I am talking about intersectionality and vulnerability. Now, to probably substantiate this very theoretical explanation with a concrete example. Now, like I said, there are multiple identities that each one of us have. Let's say I am a woman. And of course, being a woman comes with its several aspects of entitlements and disentitlements, right? I will give an example here. Probably men would not be able to relate to it as much as women would. And here in this context, please try and understand how it works in an Indian society. Again, I am taking Indian society in a very, very majoritarian and broader sense and not at very niche level. So, if I am born as a woman, I am looked down upon ever since my birth, right? Precisely for this reason, you have the legislations like PCP and DT, which kind of like, prohibit discrimination of sex, because we are that cruel that we would want to abort a female fetus, right? And pardon for my, words which are aggressive, but I think that's the reality. We can possibly go ahead and abort a child just because the child is female. So we consider female children largely as unwanted. Now, once you are an unwanted child, imagine that you are born, you are in the family, you are unwanted. The treatments that you as a female would get as compared to your male siblings would definitely be different. In many of the families, lot of expenses for education are done on the male child, not on the female child. That's also because, male child is looked as their future supporter, so it's kind of like better. For female child, क्या ही करना है, वैसे भी तो इसको शादी करके किसी और के घर में जाना है. Again, imagine the moment I said शादी करके किसी और के ही घर में जाना है, it's a very problematic scene in itself. In the sense, from the childhood, you are being told that your parents' home is not your home. Somebody else's home later will become your home. And then you are expected to one fine day get married to a person who probably you would choose, you may not choose, or is arranged for you. And then you are supposed to make sure that now his family is your family, and all the love and affection that you probably have gotten or have not gotten in your family goes down the drain, and then new family becomes your family. That sudden a change, I am pretty sure if the things would have been completely different, men would not have been able to probably, accommodate these changes so quickly. Because again, in a society where a man gets married and goes and stays with his wife at her home is usually not appreciated. It's looked down upon. And also that raises the questions on the so-called masculinity of a man itself. So now again, looking at it from a female's point of view, you are again discriminated during your childhood. You are being discriminated while you are getting, you are being raised in a family. You are being told that this family is not yours, that family is going to be yours. And one fine day, you are supposed to just make all the adjustments in your life to just be, fit yourself into a completely different setup. And even after that, you are not largely, independent financially, because again, the ideal role of an ideal sanskari bahu and woman in Indian context would largely be that she's supposed to do the household work, she's supposed to take care of the kids, that's her responsibility, and that's why she should just be, looking at the insides of the domestic relationships. External aspects is like very nicely gendered division of labor a man should look at. How many of us would be really okay with the concept of stay-at-home dads, where moms are working, dads are staying at home and are taking care of children? And then the point is, when we talk about these notions here, the interesting question comes about is that your identity or my identity as a woman gives me certain disentitlements compared to other men. Classic example of it also are, even in the non-organized sectors in India, where women laborers actually go on fields, on the farms for doing the work, they are paid usually lesser than their male counterparts. So even if you are involved in an economic activity, you are definitely not going to be treated equally as that of your male counterpart. So being a woman is, to that sense, has certain negative, disempowering tendencies associated with it. That's one. Imagine another factor. Now you are not just a woman, but you are a disabled woman, where let's say either you are motor disabled, that means that you can't move or something of that sort, or you have visual disability that you can't see. The moment you are a woman and then that you are visually disabled, then you have multiple other challenges, right? I will give one more layer of it because we all understand how disability actually works. I mean, how many of our homes are disabled friendly? How many of our institutions where we work are disabled friendly? Do we have the ramps for the people who are on wheelchair? do we have the names written in braille so that like the people who are visually challenged could probably read it or not? I'll give an example here. If you ever come to the Tata Institute of Social Sciences campus in Mumbai, you can actually see that all the faculty members' names and the classrooms' names and everything are written at the level of the waist, where people who are like even vertically challenged can possibly just touch it, see it, read it. It's written in braille for the people who are visually challenged. Now that's the idea. Idea being, make all of our places accessible. So imagine again, you are a woman, you are disabled, and then you do not have access to certain other factors. Me being now in Mumbai can possibly also give you one more example. Every time you probably would ever travel in Mumbai's locals, you would realize that it's not all the stations that the platforms and the railways footboard actually matches with each other. So if again you are a person who is physically disabled, you would always face trouble in boarding the local and getting down the local. And that's going to be a major matter of concern. So your discomfort in life as a disabled person starts from accessing as basic thing as a public transport. So I hope now you understand how there is negative disentitlements available for the persons with disability. So the example continues. I am a woman, I am a disabled woman. And on top of it now, imagine that I am a Dalit woman, right? I belong to low caste. And then in this case, the disentitlements which this woman as woman, disabled and Dalit would actually face would be different from any other kind of similarly placed woman. Because being Dalit also brings with itself certain other factors. And I don't have to repeat this because of the newspapers are probably largely evident on all of these parts, where you could just take out the newspaper and see how sexual offences are being committed by the higher caste people against the Dalits. That's been the case happening over and over again. Majority of the victims of many crimes, and probably also sometimes the perpetrators of the crime, usually are considered to be belonging from the lower caste. Again, the very notion that people belonging to this caste are incompetent, do not have any merit or anything of that sort, and that's why if they have to do something, they have to prove more than the regular standard, is also a major matter of concern. Now the question which comes in is, now me as woman, as disabled and as Dalit has given me 3 layers of disentitlements. So the problems which may be able to be addressing the problems of inequality for an upper caste female cannot definitely be applied to my situation, because my disentitlements are actually more in number than that of an upper caste female. Now that's a very interesting scene that probably you should understand. What intersectionality does, this entire analytical framework of intersectionality, what it does is that it says that there are various social and political identities of an individual. When these identities are combined with each other, like so layers of social and political identities, they either grant you some privilege or they grant you or they result in some discrimination, right? What happens as a consequence of it, number one, is you do not get treated equally. So your basic human right to equality gets vitiated completely. Or in other circumstances, your dignity gets taken away from you, right? So again, there are these issues that probably we all have to keep in mind. Intersectionality as a theoretical framework or approach helps us understand as how badly or negatively that people's lives are going to affect, at the same time how privileged people could possibly be. In this class, when I'm talking to you online, you all have the internet connections, have the phones, and are able to listen to me and other experts talk to you about different issues. You are entitled, you are privileged. We have to realize that people who have access to internet and other allied infrastructure are the ones who are still way better placed than the people who do not have it. And probably the example which I could possibly give is the people in Jammu and Kashmir who do not have access to internet, and it hasn't been there for a very long period of time. Imagine suddenly internet is just taken away from you, and then you are expected to just lead your lives. would you be able to adjust in that situation then? How would you have spent your entire lockdown period? I mean, we felt really, stuck to our homes during the lockdown. But when the curfews are being imposed in the areas like Jammu and Kashmir, we do basically have some problems. Those people have been staying imprisoned in their own premises, in their own homes for times immemorial, and that's going to be a major matter of concern. So when we talk about these vulnerabilities, these are multi-layered vulnerabilities, right? And when we talk about human rights trying to address each one of those, we have to identify each layer of the vulnerability and address each layer of the vulnerability together, so that the collective effect of it all is alleviation of the person as a better human being and realization of the rights of the person. Now let me come back to the parameters, and this is the last part that I'm talking about. So there are different parameters on which this vulnerability exists. Some of those I have already said are present in the Article 15 of the Indian Constitution. But in addition to that, there are multiple others which go beyond and are not mentioned in the Constitution per se. So you have the ability or disability associated with or discrimination which happens on the basis of gender. So again, when we engage with gender, sex, sexuality and law studies, we do have to realize it's a broad spectrum. You do not only have 3 genders, and if you are thinking that genders are just like 3, then we still have a major problem, because gender is a social construct and genders can be multiple. So there can be people who can identify themselves as gender fluid. So one day they may, some aspects they would do like how usually in a rigid society females would do. Another day they would act like how a man is supposed to act. That's going to be an identity. Gender and gender fluidity is also a very interesting concept. But again, because gender fluidity is not accepted in Indian context, any person who is like, if I'm a man and I'm behaving like a woman, I would become the target of the people's making fun of me. And that's going to be a major problem, because again, it's not the fun of the person who is behaving that way that you are making, it's the fun of your ignorance that people can be gender fluid, and your ignorance or inability to accept the fact that this is the reality is also a problem. So that is gender. So you can be male, female, transgender or gender fluid. And gender fluidity can run across the spectrum. Another one in an Indian context would be caste. And when you look at caste, you have, of course, I don't have to explain this, but I would refer to you one study which was conducted by the Dalit Studies Department of Jawaharlal Nehru University, which is published in a book by Professor Ashwini Deshpande on caste discrimination in India. It's an empirical study, amazing study which was done by this thing. To just probably briefly give you an idea, what did they do? What they did is like they simply had the same CVs, sent all of those same CVs to the places where different jobs were being present in private sector, not in the public sector, okay? In private sector, just to see whether discrimination exists in private sectors or not. And then what they did is only change the names, sex of the person, right? So some were given the names which are apparently, let's say, lower caste. Some were given the names which are apparently upper caste, because according to the surnames you can classify the person in one or the other caste. So sad reality of Indian culture. But that is how the case is. And your religion also can be possibly looked at from the names of yours. So if my name is clearly Muslim, then you would know that I'm a person who belongs to Islamic faith, and then you have a completely different reaction to me as a person because I belong to Islam as a religion, and you have a preconceived notion about how Muslims are, right? And that was the center of study, focus of that study. So the interesting part was the findings were such that even in private sectors, it is even with the educational qualifications and everything being the same, higher caste Hindu males have actually more number of callbacks than anybody else. Women and Muslims get the least number of it, and after that you have like the lower caste Hindus. So you may have same kind of educational qualification, but these factors basically come in. These factors are not because you are incapable of doing certain things. These factors are because people who are assessing are ignorant about the fact or have their own preconceived identities and notions. And that's how biases become systematized or they become systemic. So we probably have to address these issues while we talk about human rights for vulnerable sections, because our systems are pro protection of entitled people. Similar goes for the sex of people. So, like I have given the example of male and female members, I have also I haven't spoken about this, but then sexuality is also important. So, if you know that I'm gay, or if you know that I'm bisexual, or if you know that I'm asexual or pansexual, your treatment towards me would be different. Because again, the given standard, even in the law for that matter, is heterosexuality. The normative structure that the law operates is through heterosexuality. So that means anybody who is not heterosexual is basically outside our existing legal structure. And because you do not recognize the rights of these people, of course, there are some disentitlements and biases against these people. We have problems with respect to age. Minors are, treated differently. Adults are, aged persons, senior citizens, old age persons are treated differently. Age also becomes a part of entitlements and disentitlements. Similar is the case with religion, which I have just spoken about. Disability also, sometimes physical appearance also becomes an important consideration as to how do you physically look. Obese people would probably not be allowed to be, let's say on the banner of any good brand, right? You would usually have very slim, trim, good figured either men or female who would actually advertise those things. And then you kind of have to realize that there are these inherent biases that we all have. These biases are the root causes of others' vulnerability. So do not look at that, vulnerability is outside of you. No. Vulnerability is what you put others because of your inherent biases. So when we look at human rights, we have to understand that human rights are to take away these vulnerabilities or address these vulnerabilities. So systems have to be designed as such which will protect human rights of every individual as equal, and then would ensure that everybody gets equal level of protection, equal level of respect, equality, and dignity, right? And that's the entire framework that we will have to talk about, human rights as. Classic examples of this could be probably, let's say, SC/ST Prevention of SC/ST Atrocities Act or the Civil Rights Act, but those do very, very minimal. Something which all of us could possibly do is to engage with the draft all-encompassing anti-discrimination bill, which was created by the Center for Law and Policy Research based in Bangalore. So CLPR basically has issued a draft anti-discrimination bill, which then is talking about how discrimination at different levels actually exist. And why go further? My personal experience here in the city of Mumbai is, if you are unmarried, you are treated differently. If you eat non-vegetarian, you probably would not get place to stay in certain localities. And the ideas are that, non-vegetarians, as they are bad or they will pollute your home. I don't know how. But another factor would also be, if you are unmarried, you are always going to go and party and then have people over and then you would not respect tranquility. So me being an assistant professor in an NLU is no longer an important consideration. But what is an important consideration is whether I'm married or whether I eat vegetarian or non-vegetarian food. And that's the reality. So rather than looking at the fact that, other people are vulnerable or there are external reasons which gives rise to vulnerability, my entire appeal to all of you is to ensure that you are one of those who believe in human rights for everybody, who will ensure that everybody is treated equally, and who will kind of help everybody who you think is going to be vulnerable. Because it's your and my job to reduce people's vulnerability and help them, have better lives and better protection of human rights. I think that's where I would stop. If you guys have any questions, any comments, any feedback, you can mention it here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the wonderful session.
Because I think I have said so many things by which you may have so many questions or even ideas or comments also. So you can feel free to express yourself in whichever language that you are in, like, feel comfortable in Hindi, Marathi, or English. Perfectly fine.
Anybody who want to ask any question to sir? The floor is open for discussion now.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Asmita.
Yes, Asmita, you can ask.
First of all, thank you so much.
Yes.
So my question is, when we speak about equality and all, why there are certain, like fields where you want to be of certain, like certain figure or a specific complexion and height and certain things. Like for example, in the airlines, the air attendants, the flight attendants are expected to be of certain weight only, and if they put on even 1 or 2 kg, they are strictly put on weight management programs and all. Again, they are expected to have an inch longer nails also. Even they have to like cut off their eyebrows and everything. Why is it so, sir? And are not other girls who may, they are not, they may not fit in that particular figure, but they are like well acquainted with the hospitality industry and they are like well versed with other things. They are qualified, they have the potential, but still they are not given the chance. They are barred. I mean, like they are not allowed to fill up the forms only because they expect us to be of certain height, weight, and color. Why, sir? Why is this discrimination?
Correct. So thank you so much for asking this question. Now you kind of have to understand, at least with respect to hospitality and airlines industry, they have to stick to certain degrees of beauty standards. Now beauty standards are set culturally. So based on our cultural notions of what is the proper beauty, that we would determine what is required, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. So like I said, skin color, height, the body structure, even for that matter, the weight, whether you are obese or you are skinny or something of that sort, are predominantly factors which would determine how would you be perceived as beautiful or not. Because beauty is all about external appearance. Nobody gives a damn as to whether you are a very good-hearted person, a kind soul, or anything of that sort. We look at you, we just see whether you are good-looking or not. If you're not good-looking, probably you are not for us. Now, interestingly, that's because what sells in the market is what these commercial people would be engaging into. So when we as customers demand certain specific things, then of course the companies are always going to invest into something which customers are interested in purchasing. Entire beauty products lines in India which are about fairness, and then nobody is probably sure whether actually they result in fairness or not. We probably have to realize that that's how we perceive it, because Indian standard of beauty is associated with fairness, right? And that's the reason why, unless until we challenge these notions of what is this beauty about, and we kind of like bring in this, put forth this entire idea, it wouldn't happen. I mean, fair and lovely now it has changed to glow and lovely, right? That's only because you probably have to understand that fairness is completely different and having glowing skin is completely different. You can be a dark skinned person but can have a glowing skin. So these words are important. How we use the words in nomenclature also communicates a lot of things. The credit for this change actually goes to all what happened in the States in 2020 with Black Lives Matter movement, where fairness is considered as something completely different and is a sign of entitlement. But again, there is another side to the question that you have asked, Asmita, and that also probably I should highlight, because these standards sometimes would be required in some job profiles. Let's say for military. Now, for military, of course, you would have to have special eyesight. You would have to have, proper height, physique, and everything of that sort, because the job requires that, and it's not based on any convention or cultural notions or anything of that sort, but based on actual outcome of certain things, right? But in airline industry, in marketing industry, and all of these, probably that's how it is. In fact, there was a very interesting study which was conducted in the United States about which are those female lead singers actually become famous. Is it associated usually with like how they look, how they carry themselves? Are there any like very fat, obese, or very old female singers which have reached up to the level of popularity? Actually, doesn't happen. That's also because what people would take in the market also happens to be how these people who would run these industries, including entertainment industry, probably would be doing that. I mean, look at all the soap operas which go on in India, right? You will have female leads who will be like all decked up. I mean, in which home would it possibly be that would be also decked up 24/7 inside your home? But that's how it is. I mean, telling women that they have to wear makeup to look good is inherently problematic, and that also puts women, probably in an additional level of financial burden. Like men are not supposed to do all of those things. If they choose, they can do it. If they don't want to do it, they don't do it. Nobody says anything. So a very scruff kind of look is fine for man, but for women, no, that's not allowed. They are not supposed to do this, and that's the reason why probably you should follow some of the movements which have been taking place in the world, where de-shaming is actually going on, where when women during their menstrual cycles bleed, that blood is usually considered as impure, and then that's the sign of impurity and everything of that sort. We have practices, social practices associated with it in Indian context, but now women are owning up to it. They are saying this is a natural process. People can populate Earth only because of the reason that females actually menstruate. So it's a natural process. You don't have to shame me for doing that, right? And that's the idea. When you go to the medical shops and buy pads, why is it that the pads are usually even wrapped in the newspaper or in the black this thing? How is it that's so bad that you can't just carry it home? It's just a natural process. This shame is in the minds of the people. This shame is created by the society, and shame is in fact associated with something which is as natural as menstruating. And when we understand this vulnerability, the standards of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, which are not even scientifically any justifiable, then probably I think you should question those on. And if those are not proper, you think that they are irrational, then you should always raise voices against those, because you never know who are all suffering because of this. And the entire movie of Padman, if you would have watched this, you would actually know that non-access to proper sanitary napkins for women actually becomes the cause for their ill health and deaths. And if the deaths are so important, I mean lives are so important, then why are we saying that this should not be done? So ideas are important. Question everything that is out there with you. Do not take anything for granted. You frame your opinions on the basis of what you feel is correct, right? And that's what probably I should suggest you. But any other questions or clarifications or comments? Ashwini Deshpande's book is Affirmative Action. You could just read that. It's a short versions which are published by Oxford University Press. So that's the one. It's very interesting. छोटू सा book है, बहुत सही. Affirmative Action by Ashwini Deshpande. Okay, so I think nobody has the questions in that case. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you so much, Abhijit Rohi sir. हीच आमची प्रार्थना आणि आमची मागणी. माणसाने माणसाशी माणसासम वागणे. Basically, we all know that human rights, and you have so flawlessly and in a lucid manner you have explained all the things, even about the like fairness, as you have said. But many women out here would love to take over, sir, and they need to look more beautiful, and that way our products generally get sale. So now I request Aditya Ghuge, who is an advocate, who is alumni of Navjeevan Law College and at present your student, sir. So he's here. So now I request Advocate Aditya Ghuge for proposing. Thanks, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Firstly, good afternoon, everyone. Myself, Aditya Ghuge. I am former student of Navjeevan Law College and now pursuing LLM at MNLU Mumbai. It's an honor and privilege to get an opportunity to propose vote of thanks on behalf of Navjeevan Law College in front of a wonderful august audience. I would like to thank our guest, Mr. Abhijit Rohi sir, for sharing and enlightening us with their views. Today's webinar was full of knowledge and interesting things. It gave deep insights into the topic and also revealed some interesting facts. I am pretty sure the precious guidance that Mr. Abhijit Rohi sir shared with us will help us in our studies and walk of life. Once again, I would like to thank Mr. Abhijit Rohi sir for taking out time from their busy schedule and enlightening us with their knowledge. Thank you so much, sir. I'm really thankful to our beloved Bade sir, Bade ma'am, for encouraging and supporting for setting new standards on educational horizons. Thank you, ma'am. And sir, I would also like to thank our principal, Dr. Dev sir, for giving permission to organize this webinar session and always motivating students and faculty. Thank you, sir. I'm really thankful to Mr. Pandit and Dr. Shahista Inam for conducting this informative guest lecture series, which has got huge response from various regions. Thank you, sir, and thank you, ma'am. Especially thanks to all-time students' favorite teacher, Dr. Shahista Inam, who make this lecture series a grand success with their unending efforts for the holistic development of the students and college. I'm really thankful to all the participants present over here for paying attention and learning the things with great enthusiasm. Last but not the least, I'm very much thankful to all the students, faculty members, and organizing team of the Navjeevan Law College who really worked hard to make this webinar lecture series successful. Thank you all.
I request everyone to on their videos, please to have a photograph with Abhijit Rohit. Thank you so much, and stay tuned for tomorrow, day 14. And till yet we have seen about human beings. Tomorrow we are going to see about animal rights. So see you all for tomorrow. Goodbye for today. Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.